Well, some dogs have good bathroom manners, at least some of the time. You know, you might think that he's being obstinate or she's trying to spite you by defiling your house. Well, actually, that doesn't happen at all. It's a good idea to figure out the cause before meting out a solution. And in case we haven't met, I'm veterinarian Dr. Jeff Nickel. I'm residency trained veterinary behaviorist, and that's the extent of my practice anymore after many years in general medicine. But there are a lot of problems elsewhere in the body that can have a very direct bearing on house soiling behaviors, especially if you have a dog who has been historically very reliably trained and then starts having an indoor problem. And we'll talk about, well, a couple of examples on both sides of that question, just to give you a sense of how this thing may originate and what to do about it, and I mentioned what not to do. Some of the mistakes that can actually make the problems worse. So tell me if you're here. By the way, put your name in the comment line. Tell me where you're from so I can say hi. And if you can hear me loud and clear, please hit the wow button. And if you find this information helpful, send me some hearts just so that I know I'm being valuable. And if you've had a problem like this in your house, please give me a few details in the comment line and I can answer questions. And I'm not limiting this to just questions on dogs who house soil, cats who house soil. We talked about them last week. But any kind of behavioral or any other physical problem of pets, I've been at this so long, I'm not sure there's anything I haven't seen. So try to stump me and I'll try to help. And who's here? It's Beth. Oh, hello, Beth. Excellent to see you. Thank you. I hope you guys are doing well. And I think you're in Dallas somewhere, aren't you? And I hope you're doing fine there. Hope it's not too darn hot so long into the fall. It's really nice here in the valley. The trees are beautiful. I don't know if you've been home recently. So anyway, let me read you a little story. This is Tony T. This is a case I treated not long ago of a couple of West Highland White Terriers. If you're familiar with them, they're small terriers. They're about 20 pounds. And many people love their Westies. It's one of those breeds where people who have Westies, that's what they're always going to have. And they are a very particular kind of a small terrier because they are genetically programmed to hunt small game like rodents and do it without having to check in with their leader for instruction. They just go for it and they don't have to look to you. And that can be a little bit of a challenge in managing this breed. And sometimes people say, well, okay, these are tough little guys and they don't necessarily make the greatest obedience dogs, and we love them anyway. And maybe it's that natural tendency to work without supervision that has something to do with their being difficult to house train. Well, interestingly, there was one very robust research project not long ago that was published regarding statistical challenges with house training different breeds of dogs. And we came to learn that the suspicions that we had long held that small breeds can be hard to house train, well, actually they can. Usually we can get them pretty well house trained, but some of them, no matter how well you do it, they're never completely there. But that's a very legitimate goal, to get a dog who always goes outside. So let me read you this a bit about this case, and I changed the names to protect the innocent. Not that they were innocent, but we're calling them Billy Joe and Bobby Sue. And they were related, actually. They were a brother and sister, but from different litters, and they had been in other homes. They had initially came from from the same West Highland White breeder, and each of them came to this couple from different homes. And so, there's a lot of things that influence behavior. Genetics is a very big part of a lot of the problems that we see, in addition to a lot of the normal behaviors that we see, but environmental influences. In other words, what did these puppies endure when they were youngsters, particularly when they had that sensitive period in the development of their brains, that 5 to 12 week period of where we can socialize them to most any kind of different human, different species, and when many times people aren't aware of that, and puppies don't have that kind of exposure, and they pay for it their entire lives. So here we have this problem with these two dogs, and it's urine soiling. Thank you, Carolyn. And first thing we do, of course, is a good thorough physical exam, and in this case, palpate the abdomen and just feel very carefully for things like bladder stones, which we can sometimes feel with our hands, unless they're pretty small. And Carla, oh, wonderful. And yes, thank you. Rio and Aphrodite are attending as well. Thank you for bringing them, Carla. They might learn something. So we checked out a good physical exam and submitted blood chemistries and a urine analysis. Didn't find any indication of infection, kidney problems, liver disease. They checked out well. So move ahead with this as a behavioral only case. But interestingly, with one of these dogs, Bobby Sue, the little girl dog, her previous person had relinquished her because she had a history of house soiling. So nothing new about this. And we find that dogs who have been rehomed, especially if they've spent time in the shelter, are more prone to some behavior problems, especially separation-related issues, which we'll talk about that in a minute. So, okay, in addition to the house soiling that both of these young dogs did, Billy Joe also was a serious barker and would retreat when he was approached by unfamiliar men. The man in the household, he got to know him well enough, not a problem. But visitors were a big problem, and this dog would freak out. And of course, they live in a house, right? And there are limitations on how much distance a scared dog can create from intruders, visitors. And so they bark like crazy and kind of lunge at them a little bit to hope that, these aliens would leave, which of course they always do eventually. But he was pretty scared. So he had that in addition to his other problems. So when these folks left these dogs home alone, and this is pre-COVID, so they were both working away from home, they would give them free access to their big family room, but they would close the doors and prevent them from using some rooms of the house where they had a history of house soiling. And that makes good sense. But the other issue was that these dogs would still house soil, only some of the time, not completely consistently. Doesn't necessarily rule out internal disease like bladder infections or bladder stones. And so at night, to keep them from soiling in the house, their people kept them in crates. Not necessarily a bad thing, but some dogs have a hard time with that. So in the preceding 6 to 8 months that they'd had these dogs, they were about 2.5 years old at the time that I saw them. When they were left in the family room for as short a time as 5 minutes, Bobby Sue might urinate. In other words, if their people went to another part of the house, came back in 5 minutes, she might urinate right there in the family room. Doesn't really sound like a separation anxiety issue, does it? Because the people were still there. And it was usually going to occur in front of a particular chair in the family room. That Bobby Sue could be left by either person and is equally likely to urine soil in one of these locations, in front of the chair or in some other location in the family room. They also had seen Bobby Sue urine soil in the bathroom as soon as the owner, came out of the shower. So in other words, she would wait while the person was showering, and as they were getting out of the shower, she would urinate. What was that about? Sounds like anxiety, doesn't it? Or maybe fear. Even though she loved and trusted her people, their sudden appearance, kind of standing very close to them, approaching, that can trigger an anxiety-related urine soiling problem. So, and then on top of all that, Bobby Sue had a history of fecal soiling on some of the same places in the family room. That had happened a couple of times. So I said, okay, what's the broad stroke of this thing? Well, there was always about a 20% chance that somebody would urine soil or they would find urine on the floor when both people were absent, when the dogs were left alone. So it doesn't happen every time, but 20% of the time, that's a lot of urine. Well, so here's my diagnosis at this point. With Bobby Sue, she pretty clearly had a separation distress problem, and urine soiling was the primary symptom of that. But she was also inadequately house soiled because this thing was house trained, because this problem would happen sometimes whether the people were there or not. And clearly she had some fear of unfamiliar people. And Billy Joe, he definitely had a problem with fear of unfamiliar people. So here's some of the changes that we made. I explained that it was likely that the incomplete house training had been partly responsible for Bobby Sue's house soiling behavior. They assumed that when they got these dogs that they were well house trained, except that, of course, the previous owner had told them that Bobby Sue had this history. Well, they had tried their own methods of house training and, wasn't really that successful. Okay, so they needed a simple canine-specific method that Bobby Sue could have to learn the house rules. Simple, straightforward, consistent. And, the people have to buy into this structure and carry it out consistently as well. So we have the one-day house training method, which is really meant for brand new puppies. And it can really work in one day if they're just youngsters when you get them. But you have adult dogs like this with long-standing bad habits. Sometimes they house soil in part because it's just what they do. This is where I go some of the time. Even though anxiety can be a factor, separation problems can be a factor, it's just a habit in some cases. There can be multiple influences on this kind of behavior. Well, both these dogs have been together for a long time, Bobby Sue and Billy Joe, and they were closely bonded, so we were going to leave them together during one-day house training. And I've talked about that before, and you can find it on my website, drjeffnickel.com, drjeffnicol.com. And you go to pet behavior topics, and under dog behavior, you will see one-day house training. And again, meant for puppies, but in this case, when we've got these bad habits, I encourage these folks to go through this, and it's a long, repetitive, every single hour process, every day for 4 consecutive days for these dogs, because we needed to make this very clear. This is what we do. Very briefly, it means keeping the dogs in a small area throughout the day, every hour, taking them out on leash to the place in the yard where these folks wanted these dogs to eliminate. And anytime they did, you could tell them they were good, give them a little treat. But the real reinforcer that a dog earns by eliminating in the right location is a brief trek off territory so they could sniff and investigate where other dogs have been, and then they come back home and go back in the little room for another hour, and every hour getting that opportunity to earn that wonderful reward of leaving the territory to sniff and investigate. And of course, they got fed in the meantime. But during this 1 hour time, they didn't get any interaction with anybody but each other. So that it was a very simple, straightforward structure. And they needed to pick 4 days when they could do this. One of these folks could happen all day consistently. Set the foundation in place. Okay? And by the way, if you go to my Facebook page, which is where you are right now, I'm going to have a little dinner after we're done with this thing. I may watch the debates too. I don't know if that's a good thing for me or not, but my wife and I do it anyway. So I'm probably going to do that. So maybe later tonight that I put the YouTube link for my video on using the one-day house training method. So anyway, there's also the power of suggestion. Even though dogs have an innate built-in instinct not to soil their living area, and so doing this can be a result of anxiety, and it can lead to more anxiety. We need to eliminate any old smoldering scent of old urine or stool. And so you've got to use an enzymatic cleaner, and not only one that has enzymes that will eliminate any organic matter left behind by stool or urine. Of course, dogs have a sense of smell approximately 1,000 times as acute as ours. You really have to get after it. So there are a couple of odor eliminators that not only have an enzyme but an active organism that eliminates even more organic matter. And the one that I typically recommend, and if you've seen my Facebook Lives before, you've seen me talk about this one. It's called Anti-Icky Poo. You won't forget that name, I don't think. Very, very good product. You can get it in a gallon jug. You can get it in smaller bottles. There's another one that's also very good. It's called Zero Odor. But you absolutely have to get after these old scents of old urine, or stool for that matter. And the other thing that I told these folks was that I wanted them to get either an inexpensive home surveillance system. You can go to nestcam, nestcam.com, and you can order a little home surveillance system, 2 cameras, and it includes an app for your smartphone for $99. And you can move these things around the house. And so if you're concerned that maybe this is happening while you're gone, at least in part or maybe entirely because of separation behaviors, then you'd go through your normal preparations to leave and you aim one camera at the inside of your exit door, because that's where most dogs with separation anxiety hang out. They might even scratch the door. And leave the house, get in your car, fire it up, and drive away so that your dog really believes you've left. And then come back in just 10 or 20 minutes. 20 minutes is better. And nearly all dogs with separation behaviors will show very clear indicators. They might not house soil that time, but you might see that nervous pacing, the lip licking, the scanning, just not a restful behavior. And so dogs who have separation anxiety, that needs to be treated. In addition to the house soiling, we need to get our arms around all of the problems that are part of this thing, not just the obvious symptom, because we just aren't going to get very far if we don't recognize everything, including the other physical things. So I went ahead and had them get some video for us. And I also told them their dogs needed a lot more exercise. They were just cooped up way too much of the time. Not all dogs do well at a dog park, but these 2 dogs did, and so I encouraged them to take them there for at least an hour, ideally every single day, but at the very least, at least a few times a week. Many times people take their dogs to playtime at doggy daycare. That kind of heavy-duty play with other dogs, off territory, really valuable. It harkens to the basic social needs of dogs. We want them to, just have everything covered, have a well-adjusted, full life. Not only do they deserve that because we love them, but because it helps reduce anxiety. Strenuous exercise every day can go a long way. So, followed up in a month. Well, good news. Bobby Sue, the house training had worked. She'd completely stopped urine and fecal soiling in the house. Well, that was a good thing, huh? Well, Bobby Sue and Billy Joe's recent separation from their people, though, during that 1 month after I saw them during their initial consultation before they came back for their follow-up, they'd been boarded for a few days because their people had left town. Well, you have dogs with separation behaviors, and almost any change in their routine, the wheels fall off and they destabilize. Well, that's what happened with these guys. And so their separation problems were actually not far below the surface, and it became clear that that was the next challenge that we needed to tackle. So, when they talked to the folks who ran the boarding kennel, they reported that Billy Joe and Bobby Sue were huddled together in the back of their run. Thank you for the hearts. They were huddled together most of the time. They weren't enjoying their stay in the pet resort, right? They were miserable. Well, we needed to do a lot of work on the separation issues and the stresses that resulted from that, which is, of course, the stuff of another Facebook Live another time. But they went back to their house soiling when they got back home. So one of the things that I suggested that we do was reduce the anxiety, and we started with a supplement called Zilkene, and you can get this online. It is not a prescription medication. Oh, Cindy, you're here too. I just noticed that. Thank you for coming. Zilkene is a hydrolyzed milk protein called alpha-casazepine, and if you look at the bottle, let me see if I can turn it so you can see it. There it is, right below where it says 75 milligram. Do you notice the capsule is opened and it shows the picture with the powder coming out? Well, what's important about that is that you can just give this capsule orally, put it in a pill pocket or something, but you can simply open it and dump the contents onto your dog's food and they will happily eat it. It's not a heavy-duty, potent anti-anxiety, but it is certainly helpful in many cases. And you don't need a prescription. Just go ahead and order it. So no reason not to use that if you're suspicious of an anxiety problem. So anyway, we dispensed some of that, and I advised wasting no time in repeating Bobby Sue's one-day house training, and I suggested that since it had worked, but then, the thing kind of came unraveled, do it for 2 consecutive days. And because both dogs were together and they were really good for each other's well-being, put them both through it again, 2 consecutive days this time. And I also advise watching Billy Joe to determine if he's responsible for some of that urine soiling. So they can set up their surveillance cameras while they're at home when they leave the room and see what these dogs are doing, who's doing it, and whether they're indicators of anxiety or just, confusion about the house training rules. So this kind of thing tends to go on for some period of time, and we work with these things until we get them fixed. Sometimes it's simple, sometimes not. So one of the most important things to remember is that there may be causes for a house soiling dog that you would never suspect. That's what makes video monitoring worthwhile. And sometimes people say, well, what if I don't want to throw $100 on a Nest Cam system? Well, just about all of us carry a video camera in our pocket with our smartphone. And a lot of people, they just simply prop it up against a couple of books, or they get an inexpensive $15 or $20 little smartphone tripod on the internet and use their smartphone to video what's going on when they leave. Nothing wrong with that. And you're very welcome to post any videos like this of your dog on my Facebook page, and I'll comment on them and tell you what my interpretation of what may be going on. Well, before we had videos everywhere, we had a real hard time figuring out what these pets were doing while their people were gone. So we're going to look at your pet's stool, by the way. If you've got a fecal soiling dog, check that stool, and if it's got mucus on it some of the time, you may have a chronic inflammatory bowel disease in that dog, where the dog has a fecal urgency. In other words, when she has to go, she has to go. And there may be no behavioral component to it at all. So bring a fresh sample of stool to your veterinarian, whether it looks normal to you, whether it's soft or fluid. Bring a fresh stool sample to your veterinarian and get it checked out for parasites. It's pretty simple to manage parasites nowadays, and that can do it. If they feel like their intestines are inflamed and irritated and they can't wait till you get home, or they can't wait until you let them out in the morning, that may be all it takes. And many dogs have bladder infections where they don't have the typical symptoms of frequent attempts to urinate, needing to go out often, just like a person might feel when they have a bladder infection. And right here next to me is a good example of that. This little girl is 13 now, and I'm all the time watching for age-related problems. And recently she started urinating occasionally, not every night, maybe once a week during the night, and checked out her urine. Sure enough, she had a bladder infection. How did that happen? Never had it before. I don't know how it happened, but a course of antibiotics put that problem to bed. So, these things can happen, and so lab work can matter, because there's nothing on a physical exam that would tell us that a dog like Miss America here had a bladder infection. Found it on the urine sample. These things are, thank you for the hearts, these things are worthwhile. Has anybody who's watching right now had a dog with a bladder infection or an intestinal disorder that turned out to be responsible? I'll tell you something else that dogs and cats have, about the 4 o'clock and the 8 o'clock position relative to their anus. They have something called anal glands, one on either side, sort of an evolutionary vestige of a scent gland of a skunk. That's a species that uses that structure. Our cats and dogs both have them, and they have no use for those things, but they are back there. And most people have no idea that their cat or dog has anal glands because they don't cause a problem, so it doesn't matter. Well, you never see a dog scoot or drag its rear end or maybe lick back there, kind of disgusting. Well, it's usually because their anal glands are impacted and uncomfortable, which, by the way, they can get infected too. And that pet needs to see its veterinarian, and the doctor can drain those very easily right on the exam table. It's not extremely uncomfortable unless they're infected or impacted, and they need to be irrigated in some cases. And sometimes we put antibiotics and anti-inflammatory ointments in them, and sometimes we even need to drain them because they're abscessed and put that pet on antibiotics. But I'll tell you what, the pressure from enlarged, uncomfortable anal glands have kind of that suppository effect on the rectum. And a dog can say, I've got to go. And they defecate in the house. And you think, my goodness, what happened here? The tip-off often is a dog who was very reliably house-trained, and then they start to have accidents inside. You've got to say, what's going on here? Now, an elderly dog could be a dementia issue, and we can treat those and make a difference for many of them for a while, but there can be other physical factors. So we need to make sure that we're not punishing confusion, punishing anxiety, punishing another physical problem. In fact, frankly, punishing really doesn't have a place in this. And if you've made that mistake, please don't feel bad. People do. We do make mistakes, don't we? Even I do with my pets. I know better than to punish because I'm residency trained in these things. But I make incorrect assumptions until I dig far enough into it to figure out what's really going on. So don't feel bad about it. Just, get these things checked out. See a veterinarian for ruling out the internal problems. Because I thought with Miss America's case, I thought maybe she had a kidney problem. Turned out it was a bladder infection. So, don't feel bad. Gather information is really what this is about. And so, there are people who want to house train their dogs, especially small breeds, to eliminate inside, like on potty pads. And those do work for a lot of cases. But in some cases, they don't because the dog gets confused. Am I supposed to urinate in my living area or not? I'm really personally not a big proponent of things like potty pads. I want to train them to go outside. And a dog door can really help. If they're trained to go outside and they have free access with a dog door, that can reduce anxiety for many dogs with separation problems, by the way. So getting them to go outside is usually best. But if you've got a small breed dog who are pretty well house trained, you've done it right, and you still got a problem, you can get these dog diapers. This one is called Pet Parents. Like you or I are pet parents is the new word for it, which I sort of like, even though they're not humans and we didn't give birth to them and conceive them. But this is a product called Pet Parents. There you go. And pet parents are not supposed to wear this diaper. It's for their dog. Hello. And they come in different sizes. And they've got a Velcro closure. And then if the dog uses it, you throw it in the washing machine and launder them. It's one of many different brands of dog diapers. These can be pretty handy. They also have belly bands. I don't have one of those to show you for male dogs. Now, what the heck's going on here? He's just jumping around. But those can be pretty handy. And they can keep your house clean and keep your dog out of trouble. Just, again, as long as you've ruled out the physical problems, if you need to use those things, then by all means do it. Have peace in the home, for heaven's sake. I just want to remind people, before we finish up here, just take the time to build a foundation for your pets, your cats and your dogs, of trust and choice. Like, don't lock the door of the crate if you're going to use one. They need the choice of entering or leaving. Provide a dog door so they can be outside if they might feel better out there sometimes or come back inside. Many dogs with separation behaviors, they're not severe, and all they have to do is access to a change of venue, and they feel better. So choice and freedom, because if we try to change their behavior just to suit our needs without regard for theirs, they can become obstinate, just like a person who you're trying to require them to do things that we want, but we don't look after what's in it for them. Well, there needs to be something in it for them. And with cats and dogs, it needs to be species specific. Cats have particular behavioral needs, and so have dogs, specific to their species and different than ours. And that brings up the empathy thing, doesn't it? Empathy is walking a mile in the other person's moccasins. Well, other people have different needs than I have, and I have no business assuming that their needs are or should be the same as mine because, well, they're not, are they? And to figure that out, I need to listen and sometimes ask. Our cats and dogs, we can't really ask verbal questions and get a verbal answer because they don't speak English or Spanish or French or anything else, do they? But they do have body signaling that's particular to their species. And if we watch and pay attention, and if you want to send me videos on my Facebook page, I can help you learn those things because that's just one of many thousands of things that we learn in a behavior residency is interpreting body signals because they can tell us they're in pain. They can tell us they're anxious. Interestingly, let me digress for a minute. There was a study done recently on the connection between pain and anxiety in pets. Had a case in my consulting room just 2 days ago. It's a 3-year-old dog, pretty big dog, about 80 pounds, and it's a golden doodle. One of these standard poodle mixes with golden retrievers and labs. This person also had an Australian Shepherd doodle, an Aussie doodle. But this bigger dog, the golden doodle, when I led the dog from the exam room to examine it in the treatment room, I always like to examine them away from their person because I observe their behavior with their pet parent. I want to learn something else about the dog when it's not with their person. So I led this big dog to the treatment room to do a physical exam. Well-behaved dog. Problem with this pair was aggression between them at home. Not severe, no wounds yet, so we have a good chance of turning that one around. But as I led this dog out of the room, I noticed that he took a little while to get to his feet on his back legs. And I thought, only a 3-year-old dog, not age-related arthritis. So led the dog to the treatment room, did a thorough exam of every system in the body. But when I manipulated that dog's hips and extended them back on each side, I found that I couldn't quite get them all the way back. And when I did, the dog was quick to want to pull its back leg back. And it didn't cry out in pain. I don't like to cause them pain just to find out that they have pain. But that was suggestive, whipping that leg back and not letting me have it all the way. So when I returned to the exam room, I asked this little dog parent, and I said, do you notice at home that when he stands, it takes him a little while to get to his back feet? And she said, well, yeah, it didn't used to be like that, but it has been the case a little bit more recently than it had been. So I called up the doctor, the general practitioner, who sent me this client and her 2 dogs, and I said, we want to just do a quick rule out on this, and I would like you to prescribe for this dog an anti-inflammatory pain reliever, a very common and very safe one in most dogs called Rimadyl. And I suggested a 10-day course of Rimadyl to see how this dog behaved. Very often find that the physiologic connection between pain and aggression, very close. And if this dog responds very well to reducing pain and inflammation in his hips, he might be a heck of a lot less aggressive toward the other dog, who, by the way, is beginning to respond with fear and defensiveness to the other one. And this thing goes back and forth. And if the big guy can feel better, then these dogs might stop swapping this aggressive and hostile body signaling between them. It can make a big difference. Not to mention the improved quality of life of the dog, whose hips now feel much better. Now, I also told this person and discussed with the referring doctor that not only do we want to find out if an anti-inflammatory pain reliever will help the dog feel better and maybe reduce the aggression between them, but we need to get x-rays too, not just of the hips but the lower back, and see what else is going on with this dog, because he's only 3 years old, got a lot of years left. We need to understand what needs to be done, because does this dog belong on a lifetime of anti-inflammatory pain relievers? Maybe. Is there corrective surgery that could be helpful at this young an age? Very well may make a difference. We need to see x-rays to figure out what's best. So more diagnostic information is always better. And it's really a kindness thing. And I know that this pet parent will do it, because I could tell spending 2 hours with her in the consulting room, she's really committed. These dogs mean a lot to her, and she'll do what it takes. And I love that. I deal with problems. We don't like the problems, but we like to fix them, or at least improve them substantially. So we're going to do a trial with an anti-inflammatory pain reliever like Rimadyl, and we're going to get some x-rays and figure out what's really going on. And nobody's going to punish these dogs for their squabbling, and any more than these folks with Billy Joe and Bobby Sue, they're not going to punish either. And people, they sometimes make a mistake, and I do not shame people, and I am not judgmental, and none of us should be. But there are still people out there who believe that if you haul the dog over by its collar to the stool or the urine and rub their nose in it and swat them on the rear end, that they're going to somehow figure out that means that they made a mistake by eliminating on the floor. Well, let me tell you something about punishment, is that actually it can work, but you have to understand its limitations. Number one, it has no benefit if it does not occur immediately following the mistake. So hauling a dog over there later, people say, oh, my dog knows that it made a mistake. I can tell by its body signaling. The dog knows you're upset with it. That's what it's showing you. And if you don't punish immediately following the mistake, the dog has no connection. So if it's anxious, it's fearful, it's got some other physical problem, you're actually making the dog more confused and you're damaging the relationship. The other problem with punishment, even if it's carried out immediately following the mistake, is there's never anything about punishment that teaches the dog what to do instead of the bad behavior. There's nothing there that addresses the underlying behavioral or physical cause. So frankly, punishment really doesn't have any place. So please don't do it. Invest what it takes to figure out why it's happening. So thank you for being here with me and sharing some information and passing this on to your friends. You can share this Facebook Live with any of your pet-loving friends and family. And you're welcome to send me your questions on my Facebook page. I'm happy to have them because many times I answer them in my weekly column in the Albuquerque Journal. And you can get my questions and answers every Tuesday, by the way, if you subscribe to my Facebook page. Just go to Facebook, well, you know my Facebook page, you're on it right now. Go to my website, drjeffnicol.com, drjeff, N-I-C-H-O-L, no S on my name, .com. And at the bottom of the homepage, you can subscribe. And of course, that's free. You just put your email address. And I don't send you a bunch of junk emails. You'll simply, every Tuesday morning, get my Facebook Live video from the previous week and my weekly media blog, we call it, which is my column. Although, sometimes it's not a question answer. Sometimes I put information on new research on behavior or some other physical problem. This week, tomorrow morning's newspaper column, which you'll get on Tuesday, is a question from actually a friend of mine she lives with her husband in Massachusetts, or maybe it's New Hampshire. Carolyn, where does Christy live?
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, thank you. And Christy and her husband have this dog whose veterinarian diagnosed it with laryngeal paralysis, which, by the way, is a problem this young lady, Miss America, has developed, and we are treating it conservatively quite effectively. My friend Christy was asking about surgery. Sometimes that's necessary. Anyway, if you want to pick up the Albuquerque Journal tomorrow or simply subscribe to my website, you'll get it on Tuesday morning, and you'll learn something about this laryngeal problem in dogs that occurs typically when they're older. So thank you again, and thanks for subscribing and helping me bring out the best in pets and their people. And thank you for those hearts. And I will sign off now, and I'll watch the debate for whatever reason I'm doing that tonight. So thanks, and have a great weekend. Miss America and Tony and Gaston say goodbye too.